Antes de empezar este episodio, quiero invitarte a conocer Ricolto Café, una empresa 100% mexicana que desde hace más de 20 años ha llevado la experiencia del mejor café de México a miles de oficinas en este país. Hoy Ricolto Café llega también hasta nuestros hogares a través de su nueva tienda en línea. Visítala, ricoltocafé.com.mx, y haz tu pedido de cosecha especial de Veracruz o de Chiapas, en grano o molido, en ricoltocafé.com.mx. Además, si utilizas el código #DLC320 al hacer tu pedido en línea, recibirás 10% de descuento en tu siguiente compra. Visita entonces ricoltocafé.com.mx, eso es Ricolto con K de kilo, y lleva el mejor café de México hasta tu hogar con Ricolto Café.
Yeah, you really got to start with relevance. And relevance, I believe, begins first of all with brand affinity, because those people should be relevant to you. And then relevance of the content, not necessarily number of followers. You want to work with people where it's going to be a natural, they would want to work with you.
Bienvenidos a EntreMentorES DLC. Yo soy Efraín Mendicuti y he creado este espacio para conversar con distintos líderes de pensamiento, negocios, educación y cultura en todo el mundo sobre su trayectoria, sus lecciones y sus mejores prácticas, y compartir con todos nosotros su pensamiento, estrategias y recomendaciones para hacer en nuestras vidas de lo cotidiano algo extraordinario. Esto es EntreMentorES DLC. Con más de 26 años de experiencia en marketing y ventas, mi invitado hoy se ha convertido en un verdadero líder en social media marketing e influencer marketing en los últimos años a nivel mundial. Es autor de 4 libros sobre social media, su más reciente, The Age of Influence, en el que comparte un renovado y mucho más profundo punto de vista sobre cómo realizar bien este trabajo. Acompáñenme a aprender del CEO de la agencia PDCA y conductor y productor del podcast Maximize Your Social Influence, el extraordinario Neal Schaffer. Neal, welcome to EntreMentorES DLC.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
I have to say I'm very, very happy that our paths have crossed, and I'm able to now learn from you about your trajectory, your experience, and also learn about all the things that you have, all the best practices that you have acquired along the years, and all of the things that you're sharing in your latest book as well. But before we get to that, I would like to start from the beginning. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself, who is Neal, and what path have you traveled which has brought you to this point in life?
Okay, well, life is a long and winding road, isn't it? So I don't know of any people who have a straight trajectory in what they've done. I am a native of Southern California, and I grew up in an area where there were a lot of Asian Americans. And when I got into high school, most of my friends were Asian Americans. So that started me on this journey in university, studied Chinese, did my junior year abroad in Beijing. And then I had a Japanese roommate in Beijing, and I started learning Japanese. And well, the net is when I graduated from university, I went to start my career in Asia, specifically in Japan, where I ended up living for 15 years. So that's almost the beginning of a second life for me, the way I look at it. I learned to play the drums. I was in a pop funk band. We influenced by Jamiroquai, and and I learned to scuba dive. I learned to ski, learned to snowboard. Made a lot of friends, and I met my wife there. And living in Japan and doing business in Asia, my background's really B2B sales, but I was really in charge of launching sales operations. Like I did it in China for a Japanese semiconductor company. I did it in Osaka, Western Japan, for an American software company. I launched Asia sales for a Canadian startup software company. So I was very used to, number one, launching business from scratch. So I guess I was always the entrepreneur within a bigger company. And number two, doing it in a foreign culture where I had to deal with many different people speaking many different languages. I mean, Japan, China, Korea,
of course.
And even within China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and even within China, you got Cantonese, Mandarin, what have you. So that gave me just this really, really holistic business experience, so that when I came back to the United States, and I started dabbling in social media, and it was LinkedIn back at the time, I really just had a very, very different perspective on how we can use these as professionals as a strategic tool and soon thereafter how businesses can leverage it as a strategic tool. And when I was in Asia, I had to wear a lot of hats. When I was country manager, what have you, I was in charge of revenue, but I was also in charge of HR. I was in charge of marketing and biz dev and the whole thing. So when social media really started, I wrote my first book back in 2009. Really sales organizations weren't using social media yet. It was more PR and then slowly marketing. So I really began working with a lot of companies from a marketing perspective. And since then it's gone into social selling, what have you. But over the last 11 years, I launched my company in January 2010, a digital marketing consultancy. And I really consider myself an educator. I love helping businesses. I love helping people. And I do it in a variety of ways, whether it's consulting or speaking or writing. So that's led me to 2020, where 2 days before California went on lockdown, I published this book called The Age of Influence, which is my fourth book. But I think that this concept of digital influence is something that most companies really miss out on. And it's something that I think marketers have been miseducated on, for lack of a better word. So I'm really hoping to change people's minds and help them unleash the potential it can have for their business.
That's I didn't know that part of your life, like 15 years living in Japan. That's amazing. So, and one of the things that I really like about your trajectory actually is precisely the work that you've done as a consultant to Japanese organizations doing business in America, if I understand correctly, which must be, by the way, an amazing experience. I myself have never been on that side of the world in Japan, but I think that their culture is amazing. And I guess before we dive into the age of influence, which is something that I really want to discuss for our listeners, I have to ask, what has been the biggest cultural differences between the way that business is done in America and the way that business is done in Japan, and how have you kind of reconciled these differences, and what has been your biggest learning so far on this front?
Wow. So, there was a gentleman that I met early on in my career on an airplane flying between the US and Japan. He was a veteran, right? And he goes, Neal, let's put it this way. And I've used the analogy ever since. And I wish I could remember his name to give him the source, the attribution. But he'd say, Neal, let's put it this way. In the US, you do business this way. You have like two dots and you directly communicate and do business. He goes, in Europe, there's no straight line. You got to go sort of around the bush. There's relationships and you can't be too direct. And in Japan, it's even more so. Mm-hmm. So, the business building starts with relationship building. No matter how good your product is, no matter how inexpensive it is, you're not going to get anywhere without the relationship. And in order to build the relationship, it requires a lot of mutual respect and trust. And as a foreigner, you're already at a disadvantage, right? And I learned the hard way, but things are not, there is a roundabout way of doing business. And perhaps in Mexico, it might be a little bit more similar to Japan or Europe than the United States, right? From what I understand. And in most parts of the world, it actually is like that, right? It really does come down to those relationships. And they're important in the United States as well. But just culturally speaking, Japan, if you're in a business meeting and you're getting to the end and the Japanese counterpart says, okay, Neal, we'll think about it. What it means is they have no plans of thinking about it. And unless you knew not just the Japanese language, but the cultural context, as an American, you would never know. You'd report back to your boss saying, oh, they're going to think about it. I'll follow up with them, when you have no chance in hell to get that business. So This is this roundabout way in which the culture and the businesses operate there.
You just reminded me of two very quick things. You just reminded me, I've been working for corporate America, as it's called, for the last 25 years. So I started my career, my entire career, I built it working for either American agencies, advertising agencies, or right now for Twitter. I used to work for Google, for Disney, and always in corporate America. And one of the funniest moments, many different funniest moments across my career have been, going out of meetings and negotiations with different clients and prospects, and having my manager, coming from the US, and we go out of a meeting and it's like, this was really great. The client was really engaged. We're closing the sale. We're doing this right now. And I'm like, no, we're not. They were just being nice, because there's some huge cultural differences. And I agree with you. I think that in the US is very straightforward, very direct to the point, very efficient. What I like about that is that it is very efficient and you get business done. But there's an amazing book that I really like from Erin Meyers. I don't know if you read it, The Cultural Map. She talks about her research on cultural differences between countries, and she explains how there are some countries like the US or Canada or Australia that are very low context in terms of communication. So they're very direct, very straight to the point. And there are countries, older cultures in which, the context is very important. So it's very high. There are very high context cultures, like the Japanese culture, in Chinese, and in Mexico and Brazil, because they have a longer history. So context and culture have a lot to do in the way that you build relationships. So it's pretty interesting too.
I'll have to read that book. Yeah.
That. So speaking about books, throughout the years, you have been a very important thought leader. If anyone goes into your LinkedIn profile or into your website, nealschaffer.com, you can read like the entire experience that Neal has on marketing and digital marketing. And you've been a very important thought leader around many subjects around social media. And you've done a lot of work on how to maximize our presence on LinkedIn. I think 2 of your 4 books are on that subject in particular, right? And then you have this most recent book, The Age of Influence. Why is it important for businesses to understand the what, the why, and the how to work with influencers today? Because you said it yourself. It's been a very poorly understood factor in the marketing mix in the last years. So why is it important, and how can we really leverage influencer marketing? And before we get to that, actually, what is and who is an influencer?
These are all great questions. And I should start by saying that there's a famous book here in the marketing world, They Ask You Answer, by Marcus Sheridan. Mm-hmm. And the idea about content marketing and really about digital marketing is serve your audience, serve your community, serve your potential customers, serve your current customers. And you do that by simply providing them the answers to their questions, which I know it sounds very easy, but very few companies are actually putting that into implementation, right? So It's always been my strategy. I wrote my first 2 books on LinkedIn. That's where my business started. That's where I got asked a lot of questions, and I wanted to share the advice. So fast forward to 2013, I published Maximize Your Social, because the number one question I was getting asked was, how do I build a social media marketing strategy? How do I measure social media ROI? Wrote the book. A few years later, I actually used to have my own conference called the Social Tools Summit. And this was in part because I was getting asked, what's the MarTech stack? What should that look like? The technology for social media marketing. So, okay, I partnered up with a friend and we created, we had 4 events in Silicon Valley and Boston over the course of 2 years. And that was great. So it was about 2017 where I noticed that when I spoke or taught or worked with clients, influencer marketing began to be a very much talked about subject. I started getting asked a lot of questions, and not just, the questions about influencer marketing, but some marketers were saying, how do I also become more influential, right? How do I yield influence in social media? So it started me on this journey. I test marketed an idea for a book around influencer marketing, which ended up becoming The Age of Influence. And I got a really, really great reception. So I began this journey of really digging deep into, this whole influencer marketing phenomenon. And I realized that there is an influencer marketing industry that is really propelled by influencer marketing agencies, talent agencies, marketing agencies, some marketplaces, some tools that were painting a picture that you need to work with Instagram influencers and you should be working with people with a lot of followers, and it's going to cost a lot of money. Now, at the time when this started, brands that have a lot of ad budget, they could, throw 1% at influencer marketing. That's a lot of money. So I believe that the market is now in the billions of dollars, with 90% of that going into Instagram. But what I also noticed was that the industry itself began talking about micro influencers. Now, someone that has 10,000 followers there's nothing micro about that. That's huge, right? But they began, I think what happened is influencers sort of priced themselves out of the market and they were limited. When you go down in following, there's more people you can work with. And then about 2 years ago, they started talking about nano influencers, that you only needed 1,000 followers to have somewhat of influence if you have a community and you're talking about a certain subject. So that led me to really connect the dots with my marketing path, saying, okay, well, if we start with 1,000 followers, what about people that already like, know, and trust our brand? What about employee advocacy? What about brand advocacy, right? These are all people that we can and should be tapping into. And if we tap into someone that we don't know just because they have a lot of followers, it tends to lead to a one-time transactional relationship, which might be very expensive. It might not get the result you want. When you work with people that already know, like, and trust you, there's ROI amongst many different friends. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, the idea about an influencer is anybody that is publishing content on social media or digital media and has built a community. So, maybe you only have 500 followers, but 499 listen to everything you say. That's pretty impressive, right?
Right.
And here's the thing, the community, it's not just Instagram, it's not just TikTok, it's not just YouTube, it's not just Facebook, it's Twitter, it's LinkedIn, and it's not just photo or video, it's blogs, it's podcasts. I remember the term blogger outreach. We don't talk about it anymore, but mommy bloggers were the influencers, and we just have
absolutely.
Instagram, right? We don't have Instagram. We didn't have Instagram back then. So it's all part of the same movement, but the difference now and the way that, for the Gen Xers out there, I tell the story when I was in high school, Top Gun was all the rage. And one day after a good friend of mine saw Top Gun, he was all of a sudden riding a motorcycle with a leather jacket on, right? Today, the people that are influencing younger generations, older generations have never heard of, right? They're Charlie D'Amelio on TikTok. There are all sorts of people on Instagram, YouTube, but it's the exact same thing. We're seeing the democratization of media influence. But even normal people, it's not just the same radio stations, TV stations, magazines. There's information all out there on the internet, in social media, that we are seeing that is influencing us. So really, we're all talking about SEO. We're talking about email marketing. We're talking about content marketing. We're talking about social media. No one is talking about influencer marketing, of collaborating with these people as its own independent marketing channel. And by the way, organic social media for most companies is pay to play. Why invest in social media ads, which aren't social at all? They're paid media. Why invest in that when you can be investing in people and really leveraging social media for what it was meant to be, inciting word of mouth marketing? That it's not going to happen with organic social media. It's not going to happen with an ad. It only happens when people are talking about you. And if you're a Coca-Cola, people talk about you, that's awesome. But if not, you want to collaborate with other social media users that have some influence, that have some community, and really incite that word of mouth. And that's really the heart of what I talk about in the age of influence.
Right. I didn't ride the motorcycle, but I certainly had the leather jacket.
And I mentioned this on a podcast a few days ago. Top Gun 2 apparently is coming out next year. So something for all of us to look forward to.
So new leather jackets for everyone.
There you go.
So I want to double click in a couple of things that you just mentioned. No? And first, talking about the different categories that you explain in your book, The Age of Influence, you have celebrities, you have these micro influencers and the nano influencers, and then you have the employee advocacy. And I think that one thing that's very important is for people who are not familiar with marketing or digital marketing to understand, and they own their small business, for instance, and they want to start using influencers. It's a math game. In a way, the broader the reach, the lesser the conversion, and a lot of people want to go out and reach out to the biggest celebrity out there who has like the 1 billion followers, and that's not necessarily going to be the right answer for your company or your business in particular. Whereas if you go into a nano influencer and a person who you said might have 500 people following them, or might have a blog with a readership of, 10,000 people reading it, that might get you a much better conversion rate and a much better return on your investment than trying to reach out everybody out there.
Yeah, you really got to start with relevance. And relevance, believe, begins first of all with brand affinity, because those people should be relevant to you. And then relevance of the content, not necessarily number of followers. You want to work with people where it's going to be a natural, they would want to work with you. And I think that a lot of brands, when they try to work with these celebrity influencers, they're trying to sort of, trying to stick a round peg into a very, very small square hole.
Right.
It doesn't fit and it's not aligned. And even if that influencer were to work with you, there's going to be misalignment. And the followers are going to say, well, this person's clearly getting paid off to post about this because it looks nothing like all their other content. So I do believe in, rather than reaching out to those big influencers, really foster the influence of all those people around you that you can collaborate, that already know, like, and trust you, and train them how to become more influential. I think I wrote about it in the book, but if I didn't, I went to a big consumer package goods company. They're a European company. I went to their APAC headquarters in Singapore, and I talked with a brand manager there, and they were talking about training, spending money to train nano influencers that were customers of how to take better photos, how to take better videos, how to write better copy, how to better network, how to better use social media. And that's the approach. We get into employee advocacy or employee influencer programs, as I like to talk about it. But if you can train these people into becoming more influential, that's a win-win. Then you get more people who want to be involved, who have more goodwill for your brand. And, at the end of the day, you're going to get a longer term relationship. And hopefully with your help, these people yield more and more influence, and it's all going to be to your benefit.
I love to hear that. And for years, I've kept asking myself, why do brands, try to always bring in new clients and focus all of their efforts, or the majority of their efforts, in new clients acquisition versus really taking care of the people who are already their clients, their loyal customers, and you can turn them into your brand ambassadors or advocates. And speaking about advocacy and employee influencers, you have a whole chapter dedicated to this in your book, no? Talking about the employees as influencers. Now, I personally always had the premise that we are all responsible for the different ways the organizations that we work for engage with their different audiences out there. Be it, I don't care if it's a customer, a vendor, a partner, every person who works for an organization becomes an ambassador or a speaker speaks on behalf of the organization in every engagement that we have out there. Absolutely. And we create these experiences out there. However, you're taking it a little further than that, which I love. Now, and it's you're taking it to the next level. It's leveraging our employees as influencers by building this advocacy. Can you dive deeper into that?
Yeah. So if we were to look at this brand affinity model, instead of looking at influence in terms of number of followers, set a minimum threshold, say 1,000 followers on Twitter, 1,000 LinkedIn Connect, whatever it is. And then who likes, knows, and trusts our brand? Well, we begin with our employees. Their livelihood is tied to it. And in fact, when we think about people monetizing influence, it's the salespeople who actually monetize online influence when they get better sales and therefore bigger commissions in most companies, right? Mm-hmm. We also have the CEO who often has bonuses that are attached to performance. Sometimes that's the performance of the stock. And then you have the executive team. These are the people that are the most outward-facing representatives of the company, or they have to be outward-facing for their job. We can throw in marketing, PR, marketing communications, and all that. These are the people where they should become influencers and really the biggest brand ambassadors for the company. It's in the company's best interest. It's in their best interest. It's an absolute win-win. So when I talk about employee influencer, I'm not talking about anyone and everyone, although there are people probably already talking about your company in social without you're knowing it, right? There are other people who may want to talk about your company, but they're afraid that they're going to get their wrist slapped. They're not sure of the legalese. They've heard of people getting fired for posting stuff on Facebook, right? So it really begins with this open-minded thought that says we as a business, we want to incite more word of mouth in social. We want to work together with those that also are using social professionally, and we want to find ways to help each other. And if we can create a program that trains our employees how to create a better personal brand, how to use social media responsibly as a professional, how to social network on social media, how to create better content if that's what they want to do. If we have that place, we talk about a center of excellence that a lot of companies have for their internal marketing. I'm talking about a center of excellence for their employees and how to better use social media, right? Because it's such an important career tool as well. So Absolutely. if you have that sort of program, the ROI is obviously, if you're a B2B organization, you have social selling, which fits right in here with salespeople as influencers, and you have marketing content that you want to get more amplification for. And we can also leverage our employees to help us create content as well to actually save money on the content, right? Why can't we now take that program and expand it to our customers, to our partners, to our followers, who we handpick, obviously, and then you begin to have an army of nano and micro influencers over time. It begins to be a really powerful presence that I know some brands, brands call them brand ambassador programs, and they stop at the external. They stop at sort of like the customers and fans. They don't include the employee. I'm saying make one all inclusive, because if you have customers, don't you think your employees want to know how your customers use the product or service?
Right.
Or ask them questions if you're in product marketing, what have you. So bring it all together. But it really starts with the mindset that these are employees for life. They may take the training, go elsewhere, but guess what? If your company is one of the first to actually train people on this stuff, I think you're going to be a destination that a lot of people would want to work at. And the more you invest, the more you're going to reap. And I believe with this employee for life mentality that hopefully you have, these are lifelong benefits. Why wouldn't, even if you move to another company, you're probably going to recommend your friends to work at that company, right?
What I love about what you're saying is, I think that right now, I think we're recording in 2020, and I would like to think that most businesses have some kind of a social media governance manual for their employees and for the company. But what I really like about your proposal is that it's not only about social media governance, but really about teaching people how to build their personal brand and tie that personal brand to the brand of the organization and the experience that people will have when engaging with that organization. And I think that more and more companies absolutely need to start looking into this.
And it solves one big problem that every company has. They call it employee engagement. If you want to get more engagement, if you want to have more internal communication, this is the way to do it, right?
Absolutely. I really like that. So when you think about, and with your experience with when a lot of people, at least in this side of the world, think about a culture like Japan, a lot of people like to think that they kind of live in the future, and they're doing or spearheading some changes in terms of a lot of things. Are you seeing more companies over there, or maybe in America, which are already starting to leverage this employee advocacy, or is there still a long way to go?
There are some companies, primarily here, that are, employee advocacy as a keyword has been around since 2014, 15. I think employee influencer is something brand new this year. So there are many companies that tried employee advocacy programs, didn't work. There are others where it has worked and they're expanding, but it's still, I believe, very, very new. And even if you've been doing it, the traditional approach is, marketing says, we have all this great content. We want to get more clicks. Oh, let's use this tool and then let our employees access it. And they're going to share our content with their networks, and then we'll gamify it and we'll give away stuff for people to get the most clicks. So it's just, the whole concept is a little bit different. The employees are saying, well, why would I want to join this program? I don't want to spam my friends with your promotional content. So I'm talking about, actually including employees in your content, right? Actually asking them for advice. What do they read? What influences them? Instead of going outside of your company when you create content, of leveraging their voices, right? And really showcasing them. Instead of doing a video shoot outside, are there any employees who do video? Instead of doing a photo, are there any employees who take photos, right? It's just a very, very different approach that goes above and beyond that mere content amplification. So this is something I think, in terms of companies investing in training their brand ambassadors, as well as employees training employee influencers, I think we're still very much the tip of the iceberg.
What I liked about that is, it's focusing on the bright spots, focusing on the people who are already doing it and leveraging their knowledge and their experience as well. It's really interesting. I really like that. Hey, thinking about your career, let me change lanes for a moment here. And speaking about your career, and you mentioned that you started working on social, focusing on LinkedIn, and you've been doing this consultancy work for both American and Japanese companies for quite a while. And with all the things that you've done, all the ups and downs in your career, if Doc Brown, remember Doc Brown? If Doc Brown would show up at your door with the DeLorean and will give you the hands to the DeLorean, at what point in time would you travel back or in the future to visit Neal, and for what?
I have always tried to live a life of no regrets. And yeah, there are some shortcuts I could have taken. I think one of them is, I would say back in 2011, 2012, I started getting asked, Neal, do you have like a digital course? I'm like, well, what do you mean by digital course? And so I have always been B2B. That's my background. That's why I never launched an agency. That's why I went into the consultancy route. I just didn't have that agency background. So, and I look back at, there were people like a guy named Lewis Howes, who at the time had written a LinkedIn book. His book came out before mine, and he started buying a bunch of LinkedIn groups, and he started doing a lot of webinars, and he started creating a digital product, right? And then he hooked up with Amy Porterfield, and the rest is history, and he has an amazing career he's built out of that. So that whole digital economy, because I was never B2C, I missed out on that, right? And I'm still, I've done very well with B2B, and I enjoy working with companies and then teaching people how to do that for free through my blogs and my podcast. That's the way I've always operated. But, if I could go back, what would it have been like if I had started to develop digital products, digital communities, from a monetization perspective? How, and from an influencer perspective as well, how might I be different today? And I think we could say the same thing as well. Podcasting, I started back in 2013, but I never listened to podcasts. So it was like a content marketing thing that I really wasn't passionate about. I stopped doing it in 2015. And then once I started listening to podcasts myself in Q4 2019, I started doing it again. And now I'm really passionate about it. And it's where I'm sharing all my, all my best content, hopefully. So if I had stuck the course, what might that have looked like? And if I had started a YouTube channel a few years ago where I, videotape. So those are, digital product, podcast, YouTube, those are the three areas where if I could go back in history, I might go to one of those touch points and say, okay, strategically, this is what I'm going to do. But for me, it's how many people do you help, right? How do you serve your community? How many people have you helped in life? And I've been happy with what I've been able to achieve. So like I said, no regrets, but those detours might have created some significant changes in my career, or I might be the same as I am today. Who knows?
Yeah, and you touched on a very important thing. It's about serving people and about helping people. And if you can do this for 10 people or 100 and 100,000 or 1,000,000, it's good. You're helping people, and that's the key to me, I think. Let me, as we move into the final lap of the show today, I want to ask you, I always ask our guests about their habits and routines, because I hold this premise that in order for a leader like you to be as proficient and productive as you are, and with all the work that you do, you necessarily have to come up with certain routines and develop certain habits. Routines to help you be more efficient, and habits to help you keep your energy up and be able to do everything that you do. So what routines and what habits have you developed that you've now integrated into your life and help you every day?
Well, so the name of my company is PDCA Social, and PDCA is actually a concept I learned in Japan, which actually, for those that may not be familiar, it comes from a gentleman named Professor Edwards Deming, who's considered the godfather of quality control. So he's well revered in Japan. And the PDCA was basically, it's also called the Deming Circle after the name of the professor. It's basically a way to manage experiments. And it's very simple: plan, do, check, act, right? So I learned about this back in the 90s as a way to manage my own work. And it's something that's really stuck with me, this idea of having a plan, of doing it, of checking how I did, and then optimizing it. And it's a never ending circle of Kaizen. So this is really something when I wrote, when in January 2010, I launched my agency and I had companies reaching out to me for social media marketing strategy and there was no framework that existed. I leverage that PDCA framework and I leverage it for everything I do. And I tell companies, well, okay, you're not on Instagram yet. Well, you're never going to know how you perform until you get on Instagram. You haven't blogged about a certain subject. You haven't done a webinar before. You're never going to know how you do until you actually do it. And then you optimize from there. So part of it is just this spirit of experimentation, but part of it is being very much data driven. And I am very much data driven, both when I work with my clients as well as for my own business. So I think that's one sort of overarching concept, or, I don't know if you would call it a habit, but based on that, the reason I mentioned that is I'm very process oriented. And Professor Edwards Deming also said, if you don't have a process, you don't know what you're doing. I think that's a brilliant idea. So when I work with my clients or even for my own business, I splice and dice tasks basically into daily, weekly, monthly processes. So there's certain things I'll do daily, certain things I do weekly, certain things I do monthly. And if I can create processes for these and have defined tasks, it gives me the ability to optimize those over time. It also gives me the ability to delegate those to other people that I can train. So I do have an organization that help my own brand as well as those of my clients based on a project by project basis. The other habit is really, really being, I hate to use the word Nazi, but when it comes to time management, and I'm sure you feel the same, my friend, when you get out there, a lot of people ask for a lot of things. Neal, will you link back to my website? Neal, will you give me a shout out on Twitter? Neal, can I speak on your podcast? And so you really need to pick and choose. And, I will shut off, most requests I get, I need to completely shut off. I think Pat Flynn mentioned he gets 100 emails a day. I'm probably only at the 20 or 30 mark, but it's still a lot, right? But you got to shut it out, and you got to be really strategic as to who you decide to collaborate with in digital and social media on what. So those are the things. And whenever someone reaches out to me like, hey, Neal, love to have you on my podcast. I'm like, great. Are we, pick a date and a time. I'm like, okay, is that a 15-minute, 30-minute, 45-minute, 1 hour? Right. Because that is how you need to manage your time today, especially because we're all in front of our computers. We're online all the time. If we're not managing through processes and through time management, man, we're going to be wasting a lot of time every day.
Absolutely. I love the phrase. If you don't have a process, you don't know what you're doing. I love this. I'm going to quote you or re-quote this.
It's a great one, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I developed this framework as a coach that I call the Big Fives, which is, all about setting your key 5 priorities for the year. And everything you do,
I like that.
Every year, every quarter, every month, every week, every day has to be focused on those 3 to 5 priorities. That's it. And that's the key for me.
Yeah, and it reminds me of, in a different way, of Steve Jobs, who purportedly every day would look himself in the mirror and say, am I doing what I love to do today? So part of it for me, in addition to every day, am I making impact on these 5 goals, is I'm a big fan of Marie Kondo. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's all about, am I passionate about this, right? And I tell people, if you want to become an influencer, you got to be passionate about something, right? If you're not passionate about it, it's not going to last. Why there's so many podcasts that don't go beyond 10 episodes, which is why when someone reaches out to me, reach out to me after your 10th episode. I want to make sure that you're in the game. So yeah, I think that, a lot of it comes down to that. And if you're doing client work, or you're in a line of business, or you're in a job and you're not truly passionate about it, you got to go elsewhere and find where you will be passionate. Otherwise, you're just not going to perform. You're not going to be happy. And there's just so much good that each one of us can do in the world with the time we have. You owe it to yourself and to God and your family and your community to find a better place or a better product.
Absolutely. I really like that you're sharing this because nowadays it would seem like everybody wants to become an influencer and everybody wants to become famous and everybody wants to, launch a podcast or a YouTube show or whatever. And I was reading, just between the months of March and May, Spotify had 150,000 new podcasts.
It's the trendy thing.
How many of those are going to go beyond that 10th episode? And you just mentioned Pat, and I think he's a great example because everybody, nobody knew who Pat was for the first 100 episodes. It was like,
exactly.
And he tells this story. It was when he hit like the 101 show of his podcast that people started to notice him and started following him more. And now he's one of the top podcasting leaders in the world. It takes time. It takes a lot of passion. It takes a lot of work, and it takes like a lot of commitment and consistency if you want to be there. So it's
absolutely. You got to be part of the game. So, my podcast, I didn't consume other people's podcasts, so I never knew how to do it right? So part of it is you got to be a member. If you want to be an influencer in a podcast as a blogger on a certain social network, you got to be a real passionate member, a passionate consumer of that content. Otherwise, you just don't know the lingo. You don't know what people are thinking. You don't know the right way to do things. So it's not rocket science per se, but it does take an investment and a commitment and the passion to be successful.
Absolutely. This leads me to the final question of this podcast. And it's, I like to learn how leaders like you turn the day-to-day stuff into something extraordinary. So how do you turn, the daily stuff in your life into something really extraordinary?
Wow, that is a really complex and difficult question. I think the only way to turn experiences into extraordinary ones is to think big, right? It's only when we have really, really big goals and a vision that we can make it happen. So I don't have a vision board per se, but it's funny, starting this year, and my daughter, who's 15, is really sort of manages some of my vision, because I bought this very, very simple notepad. Okay. It just says to do, right? So, and it has like 8 lines per day. So you got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then, the rest, like the weekend. But the weekend is always what I want to do for next week. And I always have my big vision items, right? I have a big vision. I'm already conceptualizing my next book. So that's one item. And I put it on the weekend until I can get through all the other things. So, so part of this is I have a leave no stone unturned approach. So like when I came out with the book, there's certain things certain KPIs I want to hit before I can say, okay, I've done everything I can in the time allotted within 6 months after publication, which is coming up with, on September 17th right now. So I need to hurry, but I can get closure on things, and getting closure on past big vision goals allows me to work on the new ones. So it's a combination of just, managing the time, the to-do list, but always having it there. So week after week, I'm reminded of the fact that this is something I'm passionate. I really want to get started on. And just every week I see that reminder, and I'm trying to get through everything else so I can get to that, right? Because obviously we have client work and all the rest. So I know that was a roundabout answer, as many of my answers have been, but that would be it's a combination of vision, but also the practicality of week after week seeing that and using that as an incentive to get through all the other work quicker.
I actually really like your approach. It's like, it's the only way to really stay focused on what you want to achieve in the year. It's very similar to the Big Fives practice that I was telling you. It's really great. I know that we're very tight on time, and I want to be very respectful of your time. So just before we go, I want to thank you for spending some time sharing these nuggets of wisdom with us, and also, acknowledge you for the work that you've been doing on helping people understand how to maximize their presence in social media and for both their personal brands and their businesses. I think that's really that's amazing work. So thank you for that, and I hope that you can keep helping people for many, many years to come. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate. I'm really happy that our paths crossed, and I hope that we can keep exchanging knowledge and learnings. And I look forward to talking to you in the future soon.
I appreciate it as well. I was supposed to speak for the first time in Mexico City in May, which obviously got delayed because of the coronavirus. And I think the big expo hall there, I got another email. We postponed it to July. And the other email said now the Mexico City government is actually taking over the expo hall to treat coronavirus patients or to have it available. So now it's been postponed to next year. But I don't tell a lot of people this, but one of the clients that I've had over the years is actually working with a mariachi musician who should be famous in Mexico called Pepe Aguilar. And that's where I thought we might have interfaced each other with Twitter. So I, worked at his office and went to his home, went to see some of his concerts. I was obviously the only English speaking person or native English speaking person at his office or at those concerts, but it just gave me a snapshot into the beautiful, history, the beautiful culture and the people. And I learned a lot from Pepe, the way that I just wanted to say, when we were talking about employee advocacy, he started using Instagram pretty early on and he loved it. And he had a big fan base. He's like, well, I want my fans to be on Instagram because if I love it, I know they're going to love it. And he actually, with the office, we created screen share videos of how, in that time, our fan base was really derived from Twitter, of how our Twitter followers can start to use Instagram. So screen share, in Spanish, obviously, these very, very user-friendly videos, we called them Professor Pepe content. But he is a master at celebrating his fans. And yes. I learned a lot. When we think about fans in social media, there's nothing like the fans of a musician like him and the loyalty. But so I learned a great deal, and I try to apply that in my business as well. So in a way, everything I talk about has been somewhat experienced by my work with Pepe. And therefore, there is sort of a Mexico connection in everything I do.
That's really cool. I think that he's a great example of not just one very good artist, but also he's a very good marketer and a very good business person. So that makes all the difference, for his career.
And do a search for Jueves Filosófico. I don't know if he still does, but he ran a Twitter chat every Thursday, Philosophical Thursday, right? All about philosophy. And he's a very, very deep spiritual, thought leader in many things, not just Mexican culture and mariachi music. So, but yes, really a brilliant shining star.
Cool. Hey, thank you for sharing that. I didn't know about that. I'm gonna look that up, the Jueves Filosóficos. So thank you very much. Thank you again for sharing your time with us, for your generosity. I really look forward to talking again very soon. I'm sure that you're going to be very successful with the Age of Influence. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you. And take care, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. Muchas gracias, mi amigo. I hope I got that right.
You did.
Y muchas gracias también a todos ustedes por escucharnos en este episodio de Entre Mentores DLC. Recuerden suscribirse y compartir este y todos los episodios de Entre Mentores DLC, porque estoy seguro que entre sus amigos, familiares y colegas hay por lo menos una persona que se puede beneficiar muchísimo de las historias y consejos que grandes mentores como nuestros invitados el día de hoy tienen que compartir. Muchas gracias también a Ricolto Café, el mejor café de México, por acompañarme en esta aventura de vida todos los días. Yo soy Efraín Mendicuti y esto es Entre Mentores DLC. Hasta la próxima.